I'll ask you to do a little bit of a reading if you're happy to do that.
Okay, yeah, sure. So first of all, thank you so much to the Italian Cultural Institute for having me. And thank you so much. I am really honored to have you introduce me. So thanks a lot. I really appreciate you being here today. Um, the, the similarities between Good Night Stories for Rebel Girls and Dr. Li and the Crown-Wearing Virus are a lot, because the style of the narration is very similar to the style that I used in Good Night Stories for Rebel Girls. Because in both cases, it's the story of a real person, in the case of Dr. Li and the Crown-Wearing Virus, of an historical event told in the narrative style of a fairy tale. So this is something that I practiced a lot when we worked with my co-author in Good Night Stories for Rebel Girls. I did it 200 times there. So it's become for me sort of
yeah, of course.
Sort of a reflex to go there. And whenever I need to tell the story of a real person to children, I sort of hunt for the same things that I hunted for when I was writing Rebel Girls, which is I try to look for moments in their story that are moments that carry a truth that goes beyond their biography, and these moments are usually very visual. So, for example, in the story of Dr. Li, I try to look for moments like, for example, the moment when the police goes to visit him. That is a very visual moment that has a big impact on children's imagination. I don't know if your son asked to know more about it. My niece, who is almost 4 years old, was when she read the first short story, she was really curious to know more about that moment. And so I try to look for these moments that can carry the sort of symbolism that fairy tales need in order to be epic in children's imagination. And one of the reasons why I chose Dr. Li Wenliang as the protagonist of the first part of this book is that, of course, there are a lot of differences in how different political systems work, but it is true that all around the world, it happened many times that scientists and doctors have had a hard time to be listened to by the world politicians and leaders. So by telling Dr. Li's story, I could introduce this theme into the book, that of the importance of freedom and of science, which makes the Dr. Li's story an important story for everyone to listen to, regardless of where they come from. Because sure, there are peculiarities about how China works, and there is no freedom of speech there. But if we look at what happened in Italy, which is, as you said, is where I'm from, at the very beginning of this pandemic, or what is currently happening in the United States, which is the country where I usually live, we've seen the impact of having these leaders ignore science and ignore the doctors. And one of the reasons why I wrote this book was also to contrast the wild spread of conspiracy theories around coronavirus, which is undermining democracy everywhere, and it is actively promoting a racist agenda. So it was I saw in Dr. Li the opportunity to, just as I did in each of the stories for Rebel Girls, the opportunity to tell his story, to promote bigger values that can guide also kids to to get through these difficult moments. And so it really moves me, the fact that by telling stories like the ones contained in the Rebel Girls books and this book, we can kind of have, children can grow up with an arena of people that are real people that are in the world, that are trying to do the right thing, that have their contradictions, that have their, you know, they are not saints, they are not gods, but they are real people that every day try to be these small, you know, daily heroes that we need every day to make the world better.
Yeah, I was going to say that yes, they're not gods and they're not saints, but they are heroes in a way.
Yeah.
And so I wondered, would you like to read, just being aware that we've got, hopefully there are some kids in our audience. I'm not sure who we've got listening to us, but I believe that there are some children and families here as well. I was wondering if you would like to read a little bit of your new story.
Yes, I would like to do that. I just realized, because that I just realized that when we talked yesterday about this, I told you I would like to read a small part of the story, and I forgot, because I got my stories for Rebel Girls in English. So I wrote so many stories. I usually, when I think by default that I'm writing in English, and instead I wrote Dr. Li's story in Italian. So,
so we are talking to the Italian Institute right now.
Yeah.
Why don't you could read us a page in Italian. I feel like not too much, because there'll be a bunch of people who don't speak Italian, but we are on the page of the Italian Institute, and hopefully there'll be some Italian speakers. Would you like to read just a little bit in Italian? Because that'll be fun for me, even though I don't speak Italian.
Of course. Yeah, absolutely. So I will read a little part of the story that I wrote to answer to my niece's question when she read the short story that I distributed for free, the PDF. She was very curious, as I said, to know more about what happened with the police. So I will read a short piece from that moment of the story, and then I will read a short piece from the second part of the book that is more about what happened in the rest of the world, and it's the part where I focused more on giving kids a space to explore their feelings about this pandemic, if that's all right.
Sounds great.
Okay. So, il dottor Li sapeva che le influenze, e soprattutto quelle nuove, potevano essere pericolose e che era importante per i suoi colleghi proteggersi, in modo che, se c'era in giro un nuovo virus, gli infermieri e le dottoresse potessero proteggersi e curare le persone senza ammalarsi. Allora, il dottore mandò un messaggio ai suoi colleghi dicendogli che c'era in giro questa influenza diversa e non si sapeva esattamente di che cosa si trattasse, ma era contagiosa, perché lui aveva già visitato ben 7 pazienti che ce l'avevano. Dopo aver letto il messaggio, la direttrice del pronto soccorso si stava già preparando ad allertare i colleghi quando successe una cosa molto strana. I poliziotti andarono a bussare alla porta del dottore e gli dissero di smetterla di mandare messaggi, altrimenti lo avrebbero messo in prigione. Gli fecero firmare una lettera dicendo che aveva diffuso false informazioni e che aveva fatto spaventare inutilmente le persone dell'ospedale. Fecero firmare una lettera simile anche alla dottoressa Ai, facendole promettere che non avrebbe detto niente a nessuno di quel virus, neanche a suo marito. And this is the part about the police. Now I'm going to move on to the second part, which is goes like this. I bambini erano tristi perché non potevano vedere i propri amici. Gli adulti erano tristi perché non potevano andare al lavoro. Gli anziani erano tristi perché non potevano vedere i loro nipotini. E i dottori erano tristi perché vedevano ogni giorno tantissimi ammalati. Non c'erano più macchine in giro e le città erano silenziose. Di giorno si sentivano cantare gli uccellini, ma la sera faceva un po' paura a chi aveva una casa e anche ai senza tetto, che in quelle strade deserte si sentivano ancora più soli. Allora, per consolare gli adulti, i bambini disegnarono grandi arcobaleni e li appesero alle finestre. Per consolare i dottori, la gente uscì sui balconi per cantare e battere le mani. Per consolare i bambini, gli adulti inventarono giochi da fare a casa e gli insegnanti organizzarono la scuola su internet. Gli adulti si consolarono a vicenda facendo il pane, leggendo e inventandosi nuovi modi di lavorare. Per far sentire meno soli senza tetto, molte città aprirono le porte degli alberghi e li invitarono a dormire al sicuro, dove prima c'erano i turisti. Okay.
Great. Look, I didn't understand that, but I feel like from the bits that I did read, I know that what you're telling is a really important story. And you've said a whole lot of things that I want to come back to already.
Okay.
So you've talked about governments and police telling scientists and doctors to be quiet, and you've talked about racism, and you've talked about giving children space to think about their own feelings and thoughts and giving them information about what's happening in the pandemic. And your book goes to addressing all of those things, and I want to come back to all of them. So the first one is, in the story, there are times when governments ask or tell scientists and doctors to be quiet. And the reason that Dr. Li is a hero in the story is that despite the fact that he's told to be quiet, he continues to speak out and say, look, there is this new coronavirus and we need to do something about it. And because he gets his information out fast enough, there are doctors around in Wuhan at first and then around the world who are able to start working to stop the virus from spreading. So do you want to talk a bit more about why governments would be asking doctors and scientists to be quiet, and why do you think it's really important that we are able to listen to scientists?
Sure. Well,
I guess thinking particularly about our children, the children and families who might be listening as you answering that for children as well as,
Because as we have seen, it is not a good thing for any country that a virus is spreading in your country, because shops, one part of what I read describes the feeling of seeing your city shutting down, of seeing the shops closing, and of seeing your parents that cannot go to work, and of seeing your school closed. You haven't seen a lot of this in Australia, maybe just a little bit. But for example, in Italy, in the US, in many parts of the world, it was very eerie at times.
All our schools closed.
An entire
all our schools
city
closed, and the children. All our schools closed, and the children had to stay at home and study. And we had, and kind of all the big events have been closed.
Yeah, so
and all the pubs.
It is a very big change, and in many cases, politicians fear big changes because they are not sure if there are these very big changes that they will be able to keep their power as it is. So in some cases, when a very big problem arrives, this is something that not just politicians do, everyone does it. Every one of us does this sometimes in your life, that a very big problem shows up at your door, and instead of acknowledging it, you believe that by turning your head and by looking somewhere else, the problem will go away. This is a very human trait. And instead, it is very, very important on a human level that when a very big problem shows up, we do not look away, being afraid that maybe we will not be able to face that problem, but that we look at the problem in the eye and we try to understand what it is that we are dealing with. And the scientific method helps us break down the problem into smaller components, and it helps us to not be overwhelmed by fear, but understand what each component of the problem is and where we can start. Because no problem, especially the big ones, those problems cannot be solved all at once. We don't have a magic wand. I really like to write stories that are about reality and not about magic or about fictional stories. And even when I write fictional stories, I always do my best to make sure that humans do not use magic to solve problems, because the magic is in our work, in the work that we do every day. We can break down problems, we can look for the collaboration of other human beings, and we can work all together around the problem and solve it. So this is a little bit what happened with coronavirus, that some people around the world, many people around the world, even if they are big leaders, it doesn't matter if you're a kid or if you are the president of the United States, apparently, you know, they believed that by not acknowledging the problem, they could just see it go away. And of course, that is not how it works with problems, because the virus kept becoming bigger and bigger and bigger. And in that case, you have to understand what your responsibility is, which if you are the president of a nation, it is to protect the people of your country. And if you want to protect those people, you have to look at the problem and you have to ask scientists for their help to help you protect your people.
So that is the really big picture.
Yeah.
And your book is going into people's homes, and it's a way for us as families to think about, in a way, the small picture, which is just us and our feelings, but in a way that's going to have a big impact on the world. So you say that your book is, it's about creating space for children to have their feelings, and for families and children to talk together about the coronavirus and how it's impacting us. How does your book do that?
It's you know, the dynamic that I just described is on a macro level, but the same dynamic is within each of our houses. Because, you know, in many cases, I was worried about the fact that in many families, people are not finding it easy to talk about the disruption, the fear, the anxiety that coronavirus brought into our life. Because it's like, okay, if we pretend that that this uncertainty is not here, it will go away sooner. But this uncertainty hurts each of us, and we have, in each of our houses, we have to create a safe space where especially children can discuss if they are afraid of something. For example, one of my readers told me that after 3 months of strict lockdown here in Italy, in Florence, he brought his daughter, who is 3.5 years old, to play with one of her schoolmates. And they went to play with her. They played joyfully. They were very happy to be finally reunited. But when it was time to go home for dinner, Marta is the name of the child, started crying desperately. And their father tried to console her, and she said, "I am never going to see my friend again." And their father said, "Why do you say that?" And she said, "Because she doesn't live in my same building." We don't, for the most part, we don't know what children are thinking about coronavirus. Of course, Marta is going to see her friend again, because this situation is temporary, and we will eventually overcome the virus, because there are so many great, amazing women and men that all around the world are finding a solution to this. But perspective comes with age. So part of what my book does, it shows children from the very beginning what the origin story of coronavirus is, how it evolved, and how it will come to an end, so that by offering them a consistent and coherent narrative where they can go from the story of Dr. Li in China, where the virus traveled all around the world, and when the reason why scientists asked people to go home, and what happened when we started reopening shops, and what the feelings are around these reopening. Because reopening doesn't mean to simply cancel everything that happened so far. It simply means that we are trying to find a balance to live with the virus without letting it hurt us so much. So the book, by giving this sort of a parable within the story, it offers kids a narrative that doesn't have gaps, because what I've seen is that when there are gaps in information, or in maybe we feel that we've given children the scientific information, but by not acknowledging their feelings in what it means, for example, to celebrate your birthday on Zoom, or not to see your friends, or not to go to school and not knowing when you're going back, by acknowledging all of those feelings and building a narrative, you can kind of give children the opportunity to feel more in control of what is happening. And we're basically doing for them what we grown-ups have had the opportunity of doing by obsessively watching the news and obsessively informing ourselves on coronavirus. Let's be honest, for the most part, it is not the need to acquire more information, but that the need that we are fulfilling by watching all of this news is the need to feel in control of the narrative of what is happening. So children haven't had this opportunity. And so the book offers them the opportunity to have something to go back to know what is happening, to know where we are in the process and how it feels to be there, and to know that other 860 million children all around the world are living the same thing at the same time, which is frankly mind-blowing.
Yeah, it's amazing, I think. And that's going to be what the world is now. The children, you're going to grow up, and the whole world is going to be grown-ups who when they were children were in lockdown. And I think that's going to be really interesting for us. So I'm really interested in if you have specific stories about when that how your story, Dr. Li and the crown-wearing virus, because I know you've had an early draft of it out in the world already, and people have been reading an early version of it. And we were talking earlier about how this book is very successful in a kind of traditional sense of success, where you've sold a lot of copies, and that's one way that you measure success, is that it's been published all around the world and you've sold a whole lot of copies and a lot of people know what it is, which is fabulous. That is a really great thing. But that there are other measures of success. And we were talking about how, for me, the times when I really know that I've succeeded with my stories is when I get a letter from one parent who says, my child doesn't really like reading and has found it pretty hard. And now, and last night they stayed up with a torch under the blankets reading the whole of your story, and that was amazing. And when I get that email, that's when I have a little cry and think I did the job that I wanted to do. Or Squishy Taylor is a rock climber, and so I get sent photos of girls rock climbing walls, because my character Squishy Taylor was an inspiration for them to climb a rock climbing wall. So anytime I get one of those photos, I'm like, oh, I did the job. So I wondered if you had any specific stories about moments when you've noticed that you did the job that you wanted to do.
There was this message that I received on Instagram about a mom that of an Asian family, and she has a son whose name is Giulio, and he read the story of Dr. Li, and he wanted to read it like multiple times, and it really helped me cope with. She told me it really helped him cope with the anxiety of all of a sudden not going to school anymore. But what happened during the lockdown is that Giulio unfortunately had some health troubles, and they had to go through a series of checkups at the hospitals that were not the standard visit at the pediatrician. And she told me that the Dr. Li's story helped a lot, because when he saw the doctors, when he saw the hospital, he wasn't as intimidated, because he felt like he was living Dr. Li's adventure. And he drew himself as a doctor, and he wrote Dr. Giulio on. So that story was really incredible for me, because part of what I wanted to do specifically when I wrote this book was to protect also Asian Italian, Asian American children from going back to play, and being, reopenings are really tough for children, because happen to your kids as well. But sometimes you go to the park and you don't know what the policy the parents of the other children have established for their children. So a lot of people are like, a lot of children are experiencing this thing that they try to hug one of their friends, and then the friend is like, oh, no, please, I cannot hug anyone. And this is hard on both sides, because one child, of course, feels rejected, and the other child feels afraid to touch other people. And of course, unfortunately, because of the propaganda that some people have done by calling this the Chinese virus and all of that, it is particularly tough on Asian people and Asian children. So I wanted children who read this book to, when they see a person, an Asian person, not to think about a virus career, which is, by the way, it's not that I don't want them to think this is not how it works, and but to think of a hero, to think of one of the first hero who fought this battle for the rest of us to get rid of the virus. It was on the front line fighting this virus. So it is particularly important for me, and to see that already the short version of the story already gave Giulio the confidence to navigate a little part of your life, of his life. It really gave me a lot of hope for this story, because that's one of the reasons why I wrote it.
Yeah, it was something that happened in Australia too, and I guess it happened worldwide, is that people who look Asian in this country had experiences of racism being directed at them because of the propaganda around the virus. And I want to talk a little bit more about that.
Even though, I'm sorry to interrupt you, in Italy, for example, this is an interesting piece of data. In Italy, we have a very big Chinese community in Prato, in Tuscany. They work in the textile industry, and it's a very big community. And in that area of Italy, the cases of coronavirus, despite the fact that Italy has had a lot of cases, and it still does, is 0. So it's just propaganda. It doesn't have any base in reality.
Yeah, and it kind of shows us where, as white people, we are racist already. Otherwise, we wouldn't let that propaganda affect us. So I guess I wanted to ask you about, at the moment, as well as this conversation around coronavirus and racism, there's a big conversation in the world about racism because of the Black Lives Matter movement, and we're all having a conversation about it. And I know that you have been a huge advocate for diversity in children's literature, and that you've been talking about how white folks can raise anti-racist kids. And do you want to talk a little bit about that, your thoughts about that now?
Yes, absolutely. This is something that I care about very, very much. And there has been a lot of interest, thankfully. Thank you, Black Lives Matter, for fighting this very, very hard and dangerous battle. luckily, lately, there's been a lot of interest into how you raise anti-racist children, because this is really one of the most important changes that we are called to as a society. And the first thing I would say is that parents who want to raise anti-racist children need to educate themselves. Unfortunately, there is still a lot of us who think that telling kids, "Oh, we're all the same, we're all equal, there are no difference between us," that is enough, and that is absolutely not enough. That is not anti-racist at all. So it is important to educate ourselves on what racism is, not what we think it is, but to hear it from the words of the people experiencing it. So there are a lot of books that we can read from Black authors, from Indigenous authors in Australia, I'm sure, that we can use to educate ourselves first. Because the problem with telling kids that we are all equal is that it is an empty message. It is a shell of a message. Because then if what we do is we tell them we're all equal, and then when a Black person comes near a car, we lock the car, that movement of locking the car when a Black person is approaching us is incredibly more powerful than any time we can, even if we tell our kids every day for 10 years that we are all equal. That single little gesture is way more powerful. Or if we are, I don't know, in some cases, I've heard of like people that are avoiding to get into the elevator with the family, the Indian family that is living in the same building. Or, you know, these tiny things that we think don't matter because overall we're good people, because we say that we're all equal. These little things are unbelievably powerful. Or if we change side of the street, if we're walking at night and we are on the sidewalk and we see a Black person, a Black man coming towards us, and we change side of the street, all these things send children very clear messages that the Black people are to be feared. So by educating ourselves, we can spot these moments, because most of these things, we do them without controlling our behavior. We just respond to a reflex, to a racist reflex that we have all been taught. So by reading and educating ourselves, we can dismantle this belief system inside us, and then we can pass a different belief system to our children. But if we imagine that, oh, my belief system is good enough, and I'm just going to pass on to my kids what I believe is right, then we are on a very, very slippery slope. Then, of course, one of the things is to create lives for our children and for ourselves that are exposed to other cultures, that are exposed to people with different skin colors. Because that is the other thing. If you don't send your kids to schools that have diversity, that are very diverse, if you only go to live in neighborhoods that are absolutely not racially diverse, if you or ethnically diverse, or if you don't create for your family a life that welcomes people from other cultures, from other languages, then you are not communicating to your children through your example that is good, that diversity is actually beautiful. In other words, actions speak louder than our words. But words speak also loud because one of the things that is also important is to buy books that feature characters with different storylines. And in this sense, we must be careful, and because it is not just a matter of featuring of children's book that feature characters that are drawn with a different skin color. because with skin color comes a culture, it comes a life. So I'm sure that well, I'm not sure because only 3% of books, at least in the United States, feature, let's say, people of color in general, only 3%. So these things usually take time, but what many people will do is they will just take the same story that they wrote before, and they will just color one of the characters differently. And that is better than nothing, but it is not the revolution that we're fighting for, because it is not just a matter of skin color, albeit skin color is very important, because it is a matter of opening ourselves up to different ways of life. Otherwise, we fall into the same mistake that people fall into when they are like, I cannot find women to hire in this post in my company, because they are not looking for a woman, they are looking for a man in women, you know, in the shape of a woman. So they want a person that laughs at the same jokes. They want a person who has the same mindset. They want a person, and then you're not looking for diversity in your company. If you're looking for diversity, as long as it doesn't challenge your beliefs, as long as it doesn't challenge your way of life, then you are not embracing diversity. You're just wishing that diversity was more like you. But that's not how diversity works. So it is a matter of opening ourselves up, of being able to be a little bit uncomfortable. Because if we don't feel a little bit uncomfortable, it means that we're not exposing ourselves enough. We're not educating ourselves to be in the different kind of situations that we need to be in order to grow into better human beings.
Yeah. So
I mean, maybe you can suggest a few books that are available already in Australia that you have seen that do a good job at this.
Yeah, well, I mean, I agree that I think that what I as a white person need to be doing is really reading and listening to voices of Indigenous and people of color, and we did talk about it a little bit earlier, and so I've actually put together just a tiny slide, which I'm going to try and share my slide with just a few there. Can everybody see that? It's just a few of the children's picture books that have come out recently that are by Indigenous authors. There are actually a huge number of Indigenous authors, books by Indigenous authors coming out now. And I mean, when I say huge, it's probably not that huge, but the ones that are coming out are just utterly gorgeous. And I think that we've got a lot to learn just from having them in our lives. So Wilam, A Birrarung Story by Auntie Joy Murphy, and The Lost Girl by Amberlynn Quamelina. Amberlynn Quamelina has books for all ages. She's got some stunning YA fantasy books starring with Indigenous characters, and I just love pretty much everything she writes. And she's also got a poetry book, which has very recently come out, which is I haven't looked at yet, but I'm very excited to see. And Our Home, Our Heartbeat by Adam Briggs, who's a hip-hop artist. This is an adaptation of one of his hip-hop tunes, and it is also quite beautiful and really fun to read, and references a whole bunch of Indigenous heroes in this country, and I love it. And then I've put down the bottom, I've put the Magabala Books logo, because they're a publisher, that they're an Indigenous owned publisher. And so I feel like if you're looking for books by Indigenous people, it's such a great place to start. And I'm also just going to pull up a couple of grown-up books, which I've just got sitting behind me. I'm going to come back to my own. I'm going to stop sharing that screen. I'll put it up again if people are interested at the end to write down any of those titles. But Ellen Van Neerven, she writes grown-up books. She's an Indigenous woman. Actually, in fact, I think Ellen may be a they, and I'm very sorry. I should have double-checked that. Ellen may be a they rather than she. And this is their book, one of them, Heat and Light, and they've also got 2 books of poetry. and Tarjin Lynch. So there are a bunch of Indigenous writers, and it's just, for me, apart from anything else, it makes my life better to read their work, apart from anything else. I just wanted to, I want to ask you one more question, which is about the fact that sometimes it's kind of tricky to talk about dark stuff with your kids. And it's really useful to have books as a way to address those topics. But before I do that, I just wanted to say to the participants that in about 5 minutes, we're going to throw open to questions from you. So if there's anything you would like to ask Francesca about her books or her work, or about Dr. Li, or about the coronavirus or Rome, just have a little think, because we are going to throw to you for questions in about 5 minutes time. Yeah, so I wanted to ask you, sometimes grown-ups are afraid to talk about dark and frightening issues with children, or they think it's kind of a bad idea to include children in conversations about world issues. What do you think are good or useful ways to have these conversations?
Of course, the most important thing is that conversations need to be different according to the age of your child, because the way you talk about a world issue with a 4-year-old, it's not the same that you talk to a child that is 6 or 8. So it needs to be tailored on the age of your children, the kind of message that you want to send. But it is very important to involve children in conversations around themes, rather than, I wouldn't say that it is important to discuss the breaking news, because those are a little bit harder to follow, and it doesn't really matter a lot to discuss breaking, unless it is something huge. So I don't know, for sure there's
just to interrupt, there's a great podcast by our broadcasting company, ABC Kids News, which they do breaking news, but they kind of tailor it to kids. So they have a weekly podcast. I think it's called ABC Kids News. So if anyone is looking for doing breaking news with kids, ABC Kids actually do a great job of it. Back to you,
nice.
Francesca.
Very nice. I will check it out. So it is important, I think, to discuss themes, overarching themes with children. And this is actually something that I'm very passionate about, because many people call children the citizens of the future. And I don't believe they are the citizens of the future. I believe they are the citizens of the present, and they should be treated as such. So by making our democracies more inclusive, we are talking about lowering the barriers to entry for women, of course, for people that are ethnically diverse, but we are also talking about children. I particularly appreciated the fact that the Prime Minister of Norway, when she announced school closures about coronavirus, organized a press conference for children to answer their questions and to listen to their concerns about what was going on. That was an incredibly democratic way to manage these very, very difficult transition and this very difficult crisis, because children have sacrificed a lot during this coronavirus, because they are not, thankfully, they are not as affected as elderly people from COVID-19. So all the sacrifice of not going to school, all the sacrifice of not seeing their friends, of giving up on a chunk of the years that will never come back to them, that has been a sacrifice for all of us. And this is important to remember, in many countries like Italy, where the lockdown has been particularly strict, but also in other places, because also in the US, kids are still not going to school. They are living in a violation of the International Convention of Children's Rights. So these violations of their rights should not be taken lightly. And unfortunately, in many countries, this has been, you know, the theme of children at home has been reported in the news only as if children were a burden for parents that need to work, and they also have to take care of their children at home because school is not there. A school was not meant to be a parking lot for children. I mean, school is a right for children. So I've been very bothered by the fact that the narration of this issue has not been anywhere in the world, basically. It has never been seen from children's perspective, that we've been deprived of right, yes, for the greater good, but this means that we need to make sure that the limitation of this right is as small as possible. So we are not a burden for our parents because we are human beings that have certain rights. And it is in situations of crisis, it is very easy to slip back on this consideration of children that we worked so hard, that people like Maria Montessori, for example, worked so hard to get rid of, to start seeing children as human beings with rights. So one of the reasons why I wrote this book is to put children at the center stage of this story, because children's perspective is usually erased from history. We have no idea what children thought, what children's life, how children's life changed during all the big events that we study in history. And I think it is time to change this. You were saying a while ago, my hope is also for this book to be something that children can hold on to for, you know, when they grow up and maybe they're adults, they can look back at this book and remember what it was like to live their childhood in the year when the pandemic of 2020 happened. And in a way, I want this book also to be an historical record of what it was for children, what it was like for children to live through this very weird year.
I would like to give people a chance to ask questions now. So if you can see, there's a Q&A box, everybody, all the attendants, there's a Q&A box down the bottom. It looks like two little speech bubbles, and it says Q&A. And if you scroll your mouse over and click, you can ask us a question. So if anyone would like to ask us any questions, ask Francesca any questions, we would love that. And just while you're getting yourselves together to figure out what questions you might have and to type them up for us, I wanted to talk about the, oh great, we already have a question from Gabrielle Wang, who is an Australian author, and she is amazing. So everyone should be reading Gabrielle's books at the moment as well. Thank you, Gabrielle. She says, is your book sold in China? And if so, how is it received? I think, so the question I was going to ask while other people were writing their questions is, this is a Kickstarter, so that means you're crowdfunding the book. So you can talk about, maybe you can talk about this also in relation to Gabrielle's question, but a Kickstarter means you're crowdfunding, which means that it's not already published as such. So, but around the world, you're asking people for a little bit of money to create the book.
Yes, so this is a Kickstarter campaign. So we are actually in the last 3 days of the Kickstarter campaign. So if you want the book, I recommend that you go to the, I posted in the answered questions, in the answer to Gabrielle's question, I posted the link. So you can go on Kickstarter and buy it right now, because you just have 3 days after which the orders will be closed. So I'm not sure. I don't think you will have any other way to get the book in October unless you participate in the Kickstarter campaign. Now, this is my 4th Kickstarter campaign, but it is the first one where I offered the box in several languages. So the book is available in English, in Italian, it is available in traditional and simplified Chinese, and it is available in Tagalog. Filipino. So,
Amazing.
so you can head to the Kickstarter campaign, choose if you want 1 copy, 2 copies, 3 copies, whatever number of copies you want. And then after the end of the campaign, you will receive a survey and we will ask you which languages you want your books to be in. So you can pick 2 books, for example, and choose to have 1 in Italian and 1 in English, or 1 in Chinese and 1 in English. And we ship everywhere. So it doesn't matter where you are.
Amazing. That is so great. I'm so excited that it's in all those languages. And and so the second part of Gabrielle's question was, how has it been received in China? So have you had Chinese readers read it at all yet, or because it's a Kickstarter, not so much?
Well, they read the, as you all did, many of you did, the free version, the short version of the story. The short version of the story has been downloaded by thousands of Chinese people. It was actually spread by a lot of activist groups that have seen in Dr. Li a symbol of their demands for freedom of speech in China. So many people emailed me and wrote messages on Facebook to me saying how moved they had been of reading this story and of knowing that I was trying to make the story of Dr. Li known to children from all over the world. So the reception has been very, very good so far. I know that it is a little bit difficult right now to print books about coronavirus in China. You know, people who will receive it will receive, the book will be printed in Europe or in the United States. I'm not sure yet, but it will be shipped from here. I hope to be able to give it to a Chinese publishing house so that they can publish it there and they can make it available for a wider public, but that is still a little bit, I'm not sure if I will be able to do that just because of the restrictions of the government.
Okay. I just wanted to, somebody's asked to put the link up for longer. I just wanted to say the link is now in the chat, everyone. So if you go to the chat down the bottom, the link is there. So that's going to stay there. The next question is from, I think you might pronounce it Lilo. Do you think, Lilo says, do you think that China, and I assume they mean the Chinese government, need to explain better what happened to the world? Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, it's very important that what you just specified, that it is the Chinese government. So I think we have to constantly remember to specify that, because there is a problem there, because on the one side, the Chinese government wants to reframe whatever criticism they receive as if it were a criticism of China as a whole. So we need to be very careful with that, because it is not, and it is absolutely not my intention ever to criticize the Chinese people as a whole. But for sure, many Chinese people have a hard time with their government. And as every country that has an authoritarian government does. So right now we have,
even some countries with democratic governments do so.
Yeah. So for example, right now there are many countries like Brazil that are struggling with Bolsonaro.
Sorry, I'm just going to have to interrupt you because we need to wrap. We're going to need to wrap this up. It's about time to finish. So if we just finish answering this question, and then we'll finish. Yeah.
So I think that the Chinese government should introduce freedom of expression for their citizens, and their primary responsibility is towards their citizens, and then we come second.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. There's one more question. I'm sorry, Sarah, we're not going to get to your question because it's actually time for us to finish. I loved listening to you, Francesca, and I loved hearing all your big thinking that you're doing. And I hope that people go out there. This is your chance. You've only got a couple more days to support the Kickstarter, and you just heard how many different languages you can get it in. do support the Kickstarter if you can, because it's going to be, I think it's an important book for kids to get to read for so many reasons. So
and also,
I want to say thank you to...
yeah, I'm sorry, if I can say something. It's the last 3 days, and I would really appreciate it if you could share whatever it is, if something hit you particularly of this chat that we had. If we can share the campaign with your friends and tell them that it's the last 3 days to get this book, I would really appreciate it, because I want to come back to Melbourne. Melbourne is one of my favorite cities in the world. So please get a lot of people from Melbourne to get the book, so I can come back and meet you in person again when all of this virus madness will be over.
Thank you so much for talking with us today, Francesca. And I want to say a massive thank you to the Italian Institute for hosting the event as well. Thank you so much for hosting the event and for all your behind the scenes organizing.
Thank you, Ailsa. It was fantastic to be interviewed by you. Thank you very, very much. And thank you, Italian Institute of Culture.